Accounting for receivables. The types of uncollectible receivables consist of the direct write-off method and the allowance method. The direct write-off method consists of receivables that are deemed to be uncollectible and are completely removed from the accounts receivable account. How is the direct write-off method used? Bad debts expense is debited and accounts receivable are credited. This can be shown through the direct write-off method example, as if $520 that is deemed uncollectible is debited under the bad debts expense and credited under accounts receivable. For this to work, sales credit must be below 50%, and this method is not accepted under the general accepted accounting principles. Moving on to the allowance method. The allowance method is a new account that is created known as allowance for bad debts to justify for uncollectible receivables. How the allowance method is used: in order to do this, bad debt expense is recorded by bad debts expense being debited and the allowance for bad debts expense being credited. This can be shown through the example, as the $12,000 of bad debts is debited and the $12,000 of allowance for bad debts is credited. How to write off using the allowance method? There are two ways of doing this, one of which is the recording a write-off, which is debiting the allowance for doubtful debts and crediting the accounts receivable, and the second way being the recording a write-off recovery, which is debiting accounts receivable and crediting allowance for doubtful debts. Estimating bad debts expense can be estimated through the percentage of sales approach, the percentage of receivables approach, and the aging of accounts receivable. The percentage of sales approach is based off the estimated percentage of the sales revenue. For example, $100,000 of sales revenue times by 2% uncollectibles equals $2,000 of bad debts expense. The advantages of this is its simplicity and fair matching, whereas disadvantages consist of allowance for doubtful debts not being considered, the rule of conservatism being ignored, and assets may being overstated. The percentage of receivables approach estimates the bad debts expense as a percentage. Due to this approach relying on estimates, a company's allowance balance can either have a debit or credit balance. A debit balance represents an increased amount of write-offs throughout the year than expected, whereas the credit balance represents a decreased amount of write-offs throughout the year than expected. Finally, the aging of accounts receivable is a summary of accounts receivable by their age in the form of a schedule, which recognizes that accounts receivable become less attainable over time.